Hello, fellow cyborgs, and welcome to my first update of 2018 on my 0x19 TBR challenge. I hope that this year has so far treated you well. It's treated me pretty well. I'm going to tell you about the books that I have already read this year. I'm going to tell you how many books I've added to my physical TBR, how many books I've taken away from my physical TBR, blah, 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 how many are left on my physical TBR, and what I'm reading next. So let's get to it. I reread The Chimes by Charles Dickens. I technically listened to it on audiobook, so yay, audiobook. The Chimes is a Christmas story by Charles Dickens, but it's technically a New Year's Eve story. I really enjoy the writing style, especially at the beginning of this story, but I have a hard time following the actual plot when I'm listening to it and necessarily being attached to the characters. I think this is a story that I really need to actually read in print one of these days instead of continuing to just listen to it on audiobook to know my actual thoughts, but so far I've just been comfortable giving it 3 out of 5 stars. So that was the first finished book of 2018 and also the first reread. We'll see if I have a bunch more this year too. I buddy read Sing, Unburied, Sing by Jesmyn Ward with Acacia Ives. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This is a story about a dysfunctional family in Mississippi, the secrets of a grandparent, and the history of a ghost. I enjoyed this, but I thought that there was a little too much vomit for my taste, and I didn't connect with the characters as much as I would have liked to, but I really enjoyed the elements of death in here and the ghost mythology. I found that really spectacular, and I really enjoyed this reading experience. I also picked up and finished To the Bright Edge of the World by Eowyn Ivey. This is an epistolary novel taking place in the late 1800s in Alaska about this mission of an army colonel, I think lieutenant colonel, who has a small group of men, and they are going to chart the Alaskan wilderness, which the United States has recently acquired, but really knows nothing about the terrain, or more specifically, the native people who are living there that they may need to take care of because yay, white people doing awful things. Fortunately, there weren't a lot of, well, actually there was a little bit of white people doing awful things in here that you hear about happening before the events of this book. I really enjoyed the epistolary style of this. Like most of Eowyn Ivey's works, I say that, I've read one other work by her, I've read The Snow Child. Her magical realism is 80% realism, 20% magical, so don't read this if you need magical elements to be hitting you in the face every chapter. Read this for a realistic portrayal of Alaska with some magic thrown on top. I really enjoyed the different people who are giving us letters and things to read throughout this story, and I especially also loved the contemporary letters that are exchanged between a museum curator and the person who currently is in possession of these documents that we are reading. I found their letters to be the cutest ones. I really liked how the museum curator happened to be gay, because why not just happen to have a gay character in there? It was really interesting to read, and I also loved the mythology of Native Alaskans and seeing their cultures, the bit that we did get to see. I'm always really hesitant about white people writing about native peoples, but it seemed that Eowyn Ivey really respects Alaska and Alaska's history, and the native peoples there are a huge part of that, so I'm kind of trusting her to have done it well and not just appropriated them for the sake of spicing up a story. So I enjoyed this more than The Snow Child, but not enough to give it anything more than 3 stars. I think for me, Ivy might always be a 3-star author for me, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the reading experience. I really like how she talks about Alaska. I know very little about it. It's so wintry. The cooler months, the relatively cooler months of California, were the perfect time to read this in, and I do recommend this. I recommend you try some Ivy if you like wintry reads. I buddy read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, translated by Gregory Rabassa, with Hillary from Your Robot Friend, Sarai from Sarai Talks Books, and Kristen from Vienna Waits Books. I found this a very bewildering read. I enjoyed the writing style, but after a while I didn't know who the characters were. enough to really connect with them. So I found that the first half of this book was a lot more powerful for me than the last half. I liked the magical realism in this, but I think sometimes for me, magical realism can tiptoe on the absurd. And I think I had a hard time with the humor in this book and how fanciful this book could be at times, but then how dark and completely messed up it could be at other times. I really didn't know what I was getting into with the Buendia family. Having read it now and knowing that they're a family kind of doomed to repeat themselves, I think that upon rereading, this might become a more poignant text for me. But for the most part, I was a little bewildered. I was a lot bewildered while reading most of this, though I did enjoy my first experience with Marquez. So I'm really glad that I buddy read this with some lovely ladies who were rereading it and could offer insights to me. And there were some characters that have definitely stuck out in my mind, but this was kind of a whirlwind sort of a read, and I don't think I got as much I definitely did not get as much out of it as I could have and will in the future. So 3 stars for this one, but I'm certainly glad I read it. I buddy read my first Shirley Jackson, The Haunting of Hill House with Acacia Ives. This was a 4-star read. I super enjoyed this so much. Shirley Jackson is incredible. This is the story of a group of investigators, one who's an academic, and then 3 people he's recruited to kind of help him process notes. This academic is trying to prove that paranormal activity is like directly observable in an academic way. And so these 4 people have met up at Hill House to see what the house has to give them. You learn a little bit about the history of the house. You learn a little bit about, well, you actually learn quite a bit about the history of the people inside of the house. And you slowly over time see how the house affects the psychology of our point of view character named Eleanor. She is a fragile person socially and mentally, and seeing the way that she evolves and how her relationship with the people in the house and with the mythology of the house itself affects her was really cool. This was a psychological horror rather than it is a haunted house story. It is kind of a ghost story, but I feel like it's more just a psychological sort of story, and that was really cool to read. It was pretty unexpected from me. Frankly, I thought this was just going to be a haunted house story, so that extra psychology aspect really tickled my fancy. I really enjoyed her writing style. Jackson seems to be the sort of author that's fun for me to read because she is fairly easy to analyze. And so I get to feel like I'm smart and I'm acing my English class, but she's still incredibly readable, so I don't have to really work hard to feel like I'm picking up on clues and being smart. And that's something that just makes me feel good as a reader whenever I feel like I'm looking at something in depth, but I'm not having to really force myself to do so. We have always lived at the castle on my shelves that I'm really super eager to get to. So Acacia and I will be buddy reading that maybe in the summer or the springtime, but I'm so excited that Shirley Jackson has thus far been a hit for me, and I look forward to reading more from her soon. Then I picked up Ann Leckie's new standalone Provenance. This takes place in the same world as the Imperial Rotch trilogy, which famously starts with Ancillary Justice, which is a very popular book. I love the Imperial Rotch trilogy. I've given all 3 of those books 5 stars, and I really need to reread it because it's been time and I need to reread it. But anyway, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, and I'm a little bit disappointed that at this book, simply because this is a standalone, but it happens timeline-wise after the events of the trilogy, pretty much immediately after the events of the trilogy, and this also builds off of the world building that takes place over the course of 3 books in that trilogy. But I think a lot of people who want to try Ann Leckie's work are going to try Provenance, and I think that's a huge mistake. Provenance has a lot to do with 4 or 5 different cultures / species / planets being interconnected and having political schemes and stuff happening around those 5 cultures. It was a little overwhelming for me, even though I had the background of the Imperial Rotch trilogy. The Imperial Rotch trilogy focuses on mainly one culture, with you get a second one in every book for you to compare. So I found that the world building in here was a little overwhelming. There were also more characters who belonged to more cultures to keep track of how they relate to one another and how the cultures relate to one another. At its heart, this is a story about three people who have parent issues and need to find where they fit in the world and how they want to live their life. I liked how our main character, Ingray, was pretty much a normal person. She's not a badass revenge seeker like Breck in the trilogy, but I was annoyed at myself for being annoyed with Ingray for her emotional responses to the trauma that she was going through, because I know that I would have been even more of a mess than her put in her position, but I guess after a while it's just not that interesting hearing about someone breaking down because the shit's going down, because they kind of need to keep moving forward. I think Ingray is a strong character and I like how realistic she was. Like I said, I was annoyed at myself for being annoyed. One of the things that I really enjoyed about Provenance is that the Geck ambassador, and there was specifically one scene with her in it, was my favorite part of the whole book, and this is a character who is seemingly A, unimportant at the start of this, and B, kind of infuriating. So the fact that Ann Leckie was able to, for lack of a better word, humanize this alien, make me empathize with this alien, was super cool. And that was one of my favorite parts, that she was able to completely changed my mind about a character that I had taken for granted. I definitely still recommend Provenance, and for a while I thought this was a 4-star read. It definitely wasn't going to match up to the Imperial Rotch. Breck being an AI was one of my favorite parts of the Imperial Rotch trilogy, and she's not in here, so it wasn't probably going to be as fantastic in my opinion. Over time, the plot for me just kind of got extra complicated, and even though it got more intense, I lost the intensity of the reading experience, so that's what ultimately ended up bumping down one of the stars and me giving it a 3 out of 5. One thing that I was really excited about though with this book is that Ann Leckie still challenges you and your gender binary assumptions with the use of pronouns. In the Imperial Rotch trilogy, the Radshai culture only uses gender neutral pronouns in their language, so everyone is referred to as she. In this book, this culture recognizes, I think, 4 different genders. One seems to be the gender that children are until they choose which gender they're going to be, and then the 3 genders that are recognized by this culture are he, she, and e, so a androgynous sort of identity. I really liked the addition of this 3rd pronoun in this. It really challenged me to think about characters not in the binary, and I am appalled at how challenging that is for me, but I really like how Ann Leckie makes me really think about stuff like that. So yeah, that was Provenance. I recommend. Please don't read it before you read the trilogy. And then I DNF'd Inda by Sherwood Smith. I gave this a 2-star DNF. I read up until page 169, which is about 27% of the way through the book. This had a heckadoodle of a world building. The plot was mainly political machinations at this point in the story. I know at the halfway point a huge change happens, but I could not bring myself to read anymore, unfortunately. With Inda being my main focus book, when I purposefully wouldn't let myself pick up another book so that I could slog my way through Inda some more, I just refused to read, so I wasn't happy with that. So unfortunately, I decided that Inda's just not for me. I'm really bummed. This is an interesting medieval high fantasy society where women have, it seems like, almost equal power within the society. They're not just getting raped left and right like in a lot of other high fantasy. But I didn't really connect with many of the characters because I didn't know how they related to one another in this fairly complicated political world. And the names, guys, everyone's name is just very not traditionally English. Everyone's culture's name is not anything traditional from my brain. And then everyone's titles was also a new word to learn. There was just so much new vocabulary. Normally I'm fine with it. I can deal, but apparently at this point I just couldn't keep things straight very easily. My friends told me, because I'm buddy reading this with a book club in real life, that as long as I got the gist, I'm fine, but I just can't anymore. So I'm bummed, but It's not the end of the world. So for these reads, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that have been removed from my physical TBR shelf because The Chimes was a reread. I'm gonna put these down. In my last video, I told you that I had 104 books on my physical TBR. I was mistaken. I had 111. So with those 6 now being removed from the TBR shelf, I also unhauled quite a number of books. So as it stands right now, I have 96 books on my physical TBR shelf. The books that I unhauled were just things that had been given to me or I had purchased years ago and I just didn't care anymore. I had lost interest, did not want to have them staring at me anymore. If I want to revisit them, I can do it in library book format or even buy another copy. I'm not going to go into the details of those titles because I'd just rather not, but I feel much better of them not being on my shelves. Now let's talk about the books that I have acquired in 2018. I'm pretty pleased to say that it's only been one so far, and that is Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. This is also a book that I am currently reading. I am buddy reading it with Hillary from Your Robot Friend, Sarai from Sarai Talks Books, Kristen from Vienna Waits Books, and Acacia Ives. This is a very apropos pick for February, Black History Month. Totally snuck up on me, but now I am actually reading 2 books by Black authors this month is my plan, so I'm very eager to be participating and also eager to read more Baldwin because I really liked his book Another Country and I'm really glad to be trying something new by him. This is a semi-autobiographical work. We follow this young man named John as he is coming to terms with his identity, his place in the world, the relationships between him and his family members, and his society at large. This takes place in 1936-35 in New York. So stuff's gonna happen. I'll tell you more when I know more, but so far I'm enjoying it. I'm not enjoying the writing style as much as in Another Country, but I'm really eager to dive into this with some of my gal pals and read a little bit more of Baldwin. The second book I'm reading for Black History Month, and technically my second haul, but since it's not a physical book, I'm not counting it, is Tar Baby by Toni Morrison. I got the audiobook through Audible using my final Audible credit because moving forward I think I'm going to be switching to Libro FM and trying not to support Amazon at all, pretty much. So, Tar Baby by Toni Morrison, I have listened to the first, preface thing and then chapter 1, and don't know where it's going. It's really interesting. It's taking place at Christmas time, but in a tropical, I think in the Caribbean, which is making me think of the movie We're No Angels, which is pretty darn awesome. I really don't know what to expect with this, but I'm so incredibly glad to be reading and listening to another Morrison because she's just really awesome, and this is making me so happy. I'm buddy reading this with Sarai from Sarai Talks Books, even though I believe that there's a group of people in the booktube community who are buddy reading this month as well. We're just kind of doing it privately, mostly because Sarai said she was reading it, and then I was like, maybe I can tag along. So I'm looking forward to reading more of that, listening to it. The narrator's pretty awesome. So yeah, that is my second Black author that I will be reading this month. I continue to little by little work through the selected stories of Saki. These are stories that take place during the golden afternoon, late 1800s, early 1900s sort of time period. A lot of them are quite short, quite funny, quite snotty at the aristocracy. Saki kind of reminds me of Oscar Wilde, but a little bit less self-congratulatory with his wit. Sometimes Oscar Wilde, I just feel like he puts lines in and I can just see his face going, oh, that was a really good line. Whereas I feel like with Saki, he's not quite so into himself, if that makes sense. I'm really enjoying these a lot. I just am not making a concerted effort to read one a day. I should probably start doing that. I'm about 100 pages in, really enjoying it. At this point, I think it's going to be a 3 or 4 star book. So we will continue on with this collection. And when I mean we, I mean me, and I'll let you know more about it in the future. And the final book that I'm actively currently reading, because I have a couple that I didn't show you, even though they're on my Goodreads currently reading because I haven't touched them in weeks, is The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. I am really incredibly super excited for this one. I will be buddy reading it with Katie from Books and Things and Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. This is a huge Dickensian style Anthony Trollope book about the the Melmottes and the people in the life of the Melmottes and the people in the lives of the people in the lives of the Melmottes. I think that's how Katie has described it. This is, I think, her favorite trollop, or her second favorite trollop, and I recently, in a collection of Christmas stories, which I haven't actually talked to you about, oh well, read a story by Anthony Trollope, and it was my favorite part of that entire collection. So I'm really eager to give Trollope another try, and if all goes well with this, I think I need to probably start the Barsetshire Chronicles that I've heard so many people reading, so we'll have to see. I'm about 30 pages in so far, and quite enjoying it. The writing style is not as easy as I remember the short story being, but the short story had made mainly one main character, one point of view character, and this one has multiple, so I'm going to continue forward, but I'm really excited to be picking up another classic, and especially excited to read it with some lovely buddies who know quite a bit about Victorian literature. So those are all of the books I'm going to talk with you about today. Thank you very much for sitting through this, I'm assuming, kind of long video. I tried to be very succinct, but alas, it is not my strong suit. Please let me know in the comments down below your favorite read of 2018 so far. I think mine is probably The Haunting of Hill House. Let me just double check on that. Yeah, definitely The Haunting of Hill House is so far my favorite read of 2018. So far, no 5 stars. So let's see if one of the ones I'm currently reading will take that spot. Until next time, I hope that you are having a glorious new year. Happy February. I hope that everything that happens in the next month or so until I talk to you next is mostly good. And continue to be lovely.